Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Roth, and together with my colleagues Daniel Herman and Jakub Novotný, we are going to show our solution to problem C, managing different dispute resolution strategies. Given complexity of this system, we chose stochastic approach, where we compute one-to-one interactions between agents, and at each run we add bit of randomness to the parameters of our agents. This obviously limits us on scalability, as we have to model all the one-to-one interactions and we have to run the simulation over and over many times. However, we think this gives us much better understanding of the dynamics of the system. Settlement in our model has fairly straightforward structure. We have nationalities in the settlement. Each nationality has a set of families, and there is fixed number of agents in each family, and this number of agents in family is same for all the families. Our agents have set of parameters of age, sex, nationality, affinity to other cultures in the settlement, which is actually a vector parameter, and affinity to host state.
To model the real-life scenario, we assume that there is a different influence between every individual in the community. These influences are given by the matrix D and are obtained by this exponential function. Every human has his own weight, which is given by this normal distribution, and after obtaining influences for every individual, we shuffle them and assign them to the row of the matrix DNM. We also assume that there is cutoff for these bonds for every individual. We join many small networks which model families inside bigger community. Then we run hard dynamics which make sure that there are non-zero bonds on the non-diagonal block matrices.
People in our model interact by conflicts. The probability of committing a crime is given by the parameters of the person using real-life statistics. Assume there is conflict between offender and victim. They both have preferences for possible solutions. Based on these preferences, we select solution. Then we evaluate the probability of success. And according to this result, we change preferences of the offender and the victim. If it's solved, we continue. If it's not solved, then we repeat this process, but now the selection is based on new preferences. Now let's see this process in more detail. After the solution is chosen, we determine the probability of success or failure of the solution. We assume that arbitration cannot fail simply because the verdict solves the conflict. But negotiation and mediation can fail, and the probability of failure is based on the probability that the victim agrees on the offer of the offender or vice versa. This probability depends on the seriousness of the crime, then their relationship that is given by our social network, and general probability of agreement. That's the probability that two very close people would agree on something absolutely irrelevant. Mediation is a stronger variation of negotiation. There is a constant of mediation that improves relationships and increases the probability of success. Now we change the preference for used solution based on the result. If the crime is unsolved, it has a negative effect. This effect manifests only during negotiation and mediation because arbitration cannot fail, which means that the positive effect of solved crime manifests more often for arbitration. There is another effect of the solution, and that's the culture way of the solution. The conflict may not have been dealt according to the culture of the participant, and therefore there might be a difference between the customary law of the participant and the customary law of the solution that it's based on. Thanks to this constant, this effect can be negative for great differences, which means that, for example, the effect of state arbitration can be negative. There are other effects that change preferences in a camp. Refugees won't use the service of mediator, the humanitarian organization, or the service of the host state if they don't trust them, or simply if they don't know about this possibility. So there exists some kind of propagation, and we add this propagation to our model. This propagation is given by the intensity of propagation and the level of the preference to the solution they want to achieve. Humanitarian organizations and host state usually don't want to solve every single problem, so they don't want this to be at the maximal level. Now let's finally see some results. We will start with a simple situation when we have just one nation outside of the settlement, so there is only a possibility of negotiation and local arbitration. There is a time scale and number of resolved conflicts. Here we see multiple runs of simulation with the same set of parameters. In each run we generate a new social network. Here we see the same, but with interval given by standard mediation. And we see that for this set of parameters, it's the local arbitration that's the most popular way of solving. Now we are in a camp, there is possibility of mediation and state arbitration. We see that local arbitration is still the most popular way of solving conflict, but state arbitration actually becomes more and more popular, and there is some level of negotiation that maintains. Now let's see what happens when we have two nations in the camp from the beginning. And there is a major difference. Local arbitration is no longer the most popular way of solving conflicts. And that's because local arbitration is not effective anymore. Local arbiter cannot solve a conflict where the offender is from the other nation. And we see that conflicts between nations handled by local arbitration, arbitration is not very popular. We see that it's the state arbitration that solves these conflicts, and its popularity grows. What's the most interesting thing here is the level of negotiation. We see that it's the negotiation that's the most popular way of solving conflicts. And that's because there is no really popular and effective way of solving conflicts that helps negotiation to maintain its position of the most popular solution. Now let's see what happens when we add some propagation of mediation by humanitarian organizations. We see that the popularity of negotiation is lower, but in the end we have a camp that seems to be stable on a scale of years.
Next thing that we were interested in was the effect of increase of population in settlement. Just briefly, what you see here is average over many runs of system with certain parameters, and we introduced new people at t equals to 75. What you see is local arbitrations go to 0. If we actually introduce even more people at this point to the system, it would go even faster, and there is much higher need for mediation. Actually, if we would introduce the people earlier, we would get is that the one standard deviation confidence intervals around data would get even higher. Then what we are interested in as well was what happens when we move a new culture to the settlement. So basically, again, we moved it at t equals to 75. It was jump. We introduced 290 new people to the settlement, and again, it just changed the evolution of the system. Here the negotiation risen, then they are going back to here, and the need for mediation is again higher in this case. In the system with the same parameters, but when we start with more preferable negotiation, then we get kind of sign of chaos, because here you see that the variance rises quadratically. It's kind of sign that there might be chaotic regime in here, but we didn't investigate further.
We were interested how tuning the parameters A and B will result in the long-term solution in the community. We can see on the right side that if the positive effect of the solution is bigger and the negative effect is smaller, the mediation is the long-term solution. And on the other side, if the negative effect is greater, then there is no mediation. On the left side, we can see that if the positive effect B is lower, then people are preferring negotiation. On the right side, we can see that if positive effect is greater, but the negative effect is greater as well, people are forced to use the highest solution. So in this graph, it's local arbitration. Just to remind you, 1 means that the solution is used for 100% of the time per month, and 0 means that it's used 0% of the time in the end of the simulation. Now this is really interesting. If we change pooling factors so that people are preferring mediation, they will choose it. But if people are forced to use higher solutions and as police and so on, they will be forced to use it even on this region. We were interested when the long-term solution will be found by the community if we add another small culture to this community, but with different affinity. On the x-axis we can see the day when the community was merged. We can see really some weak correlation between the affinity and when the long-term solution was found. And of course we can see correlation between the day when the new community was merged and when was the leading solution found.
So we would like to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in comments.